Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. A federal indictment unsealed today charging former President Trump with making false statements and concealing documents. But Trump insists he's innocent as Republicans rally to his defense. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
Good evening, Steve. As we know, former President Trump is now the first U.S. former president to ever face federal charges. And today, the Justice Department released this 49-page indictment document, including 37 federal counts, alleging that former President Trump willfully retained classified information, conspired to obstruct justice, as well as made false statements. And here's Jack Smith, the special counsel, announcing the release of the indictment today while emphasizing that Trump is innocent until proven guilty. Watch.
Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced.
But former President Trump fiercely defended himself on Friday, calling it a witch hunt again, and saying that there's nothing wrong with him taking some personal documents home from the White House. And of course, that comes after Trump responded to the indictment in the Thursday night video.
A boxer's hoax, just like the Russia hoax and all of the others. This has been going on for 7 years. They can't stop because it's election interference at the highest level. There's never been anything like what's happened. I'm an innocent man. I'm an innocent person.
And while Democratic lawmakers are all saying that no one should be above the law, Republican lawmakers are quick to come to Trump's defense, basically saying that this is a double standard applied and it's a weaponization of the DOJ. And of course, all eyes are now on Tuesday, which is when former President Trump is set to appear in court again, and this time in Miami, Florida. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And joining us next, also to discuss the indictment of Trump, we sat down with Paul Kamenar. Kamenar is counsel at the National Legal and Policy Center, and he'll help us break down the legal components of the indictment and how it compares to the indictment in New York City. Paul Kamenar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Paul, here we are, former President Trump indicted once again, it appears to be. We'll find out for sure on Tuesday. What do we know about the charges thus far?
Yeah, it's kind of unclear. It sounds like there's a several mixed bag of charges. One deals with a violation of the Espionage Act in terms of classified information. Another group of charges deal with obstruction of justice, namely, I think, dealing with the Mar-a-Lago subpoena that he didn't give them back all the documents they were requesting. And then there's another count that's sort of a nickel and dime count. That's a false statement to a government official. That one is always thrown in all these cases. So there's a mixed bag of charges here, but I think the government has overreached in this area, and I think they're going to have a hard time to prove these charges and convict Donald Trump, keeping in mind that the whole thing we're talking about is the Presidential Records Act. PRA, which says how do you deal with records once you leave the White House. But that is a civil statute. That is not a criminal statute. So what the government and the prosecutors are trying to do is take those charges and shoehorn them in to criminal charges. It should have been resolved civilly. They could have filed civil suits saying, we don't have all the documents, give us this one, Your Honor, we want this document back. They could have done that. But they're going from civil charges to criminal charges, and they have to prove both a willful and knowing intent to violate the law. And I think that's going to be difficult for the government to prove his mental intent, because Trump all along has said that he has the right, as he did, to declassify documents as President of the United States. And when he left office, he took these documents with him, and he said those were declassified. So if he thinks that he had the right to have these documents, but the government may say, oh, no, you were mistaken. Oh, okay, may be mistaken. But I'm not criminally liable because I really thought that I had the right to hold on to these documents. So they're going to have a difficult time proving this criminal intent on his part.
Paul, to the nature of these charges, if you could kind of paint the picture, obviously much different federal versus what happened in New York with the DA Alvin Bragg. How serious are these charges, and how does it differ from what happened in New York?
Yeah, good question. The New York case dealt with these so-called false statements under New York law, where there's alleged misrepresentation of the hush money payments that he made to Michael Cohen. Those are basically nickel and dime charges, and the only reason they bootstrapped it to a felony is to say he violated the federal election law. Well, Alvin Bragg is a local prosecutor. He doesn't have jurisdiction over federal law. So that one is, I think, going to go down in flames. And even if he's found guilty, those are, again, nickel and dime charges. Those don't involve jail time. So now these charges, I believe, are more serious because they're federal charges, they're felony charges. The punishment for these charges can go up to 20 years. But again, I don't think they're going to find him guilty. And even if he does, even if they do find him guilty, I think the punishment would be basically probation. After all, that's what the court did with General Petraeus, who you recall was Obama's head of the CIA. He took classified documents to his home to help give to his girlfriend to write a memoir about himself. He was caught, and the government and the court said, okay, you violated national security stuff, slap on the wrist, misdemeanor, no jail time, a little fine, go home. And that happened the same with Sandy Berger, who was the national security advisor to Bill Clinton. He took classified documents out of the archive, stuffed them in his shirt and pants, and he got caught. What happened to him? Misdemeanor, probation, no big deal. So they can't have a dual system of justice here with those Democratic officials.
Paul Kamenar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Department of Defense sending $2.1 billion to Ukraine today. That brings the total number of U.S. tax dollars committed to the country up to $40 billion. This as lawmakers on Capitol Hill are at odds over pushing an extra defense spending package as a way to circumvent agreements made in the debt ceiling bill. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more on the split between House and Senate Republicans.
The Pentagon is sending over $2 billion to Ukraine for defense systems and ammunition. This as President Biden said earlier this week that Washington will continue to have the funding that it needs to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is despite growing Republican opposition from Congress. Now, this issue specifically sheds light on some fractions that we're seeing within the Republican Party right now over defense spending. Some Republican senators are discontent with the $886 billion defense spending cap set for this year in that debt ceiling bill that Congress took up. Some Republicans say they feel this is not enough to combat the geopolitical threats that we're now facing. But in an effort to win over those skeptical Republicans in the Senate, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said that there would be room for an additional supplemental defense spending package later on. McConnell earlier this week reiterating that point.
The government's work to provide for the common defense remains unfinished.
Now, this is directly at odds with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who has pointed fingers at Senate Republicans over this issue.
I've got a challenge over there on the Senate side with even Senate Republicans who now just want to blow up the deal to spend more money.
Speaker McCarthy has committed to not bringing any additional defense spending to the floor for a vote. His position is that if the Pentagon needs more funding for certain initiatives, they should change the way they allocate funds. He specifically pointed to the fact that the Pentagon has recently failed its 5th consecutive audit for accounting. It was unable to account for 61% of the $3.5 trillion in assets. We spoke to some House members on this issue, but they were hesitant to give their position. Take a look.
You know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Let's not try and hustle one right now, because then everybody else is going to want their turn at it.
Now, the deadline for Congress to pass its appropriations bills is just 4 months from now. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
A new poll now showing over 2/3 of Americans don't have a liberal view on social issues. yet companies are still using such issues to advertise to consumers. NTD's Arian Pazdar spoke with a Wall Street banker to find out some of the possible reasons behind the push.
On Thursday, Gallup released its annual Values and Beliefs survey. 38% of people now say they're conservative on social issues, which is up 5% from last year. At the same time, only 29% say they're liberal on those issues, down 5% from last year. Last year, the numbers were split evenly. This new poll comes in the light of multiple companies suffering financial losses after including social issues in their advertisements.
If people don't seem to agree with those social issues, why do companies use them to advertise to consumers?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and one could wonder, companies like Target and Anheuser-Busch and Disney and Coca-Cola, why would they behave this way? In fact, they're acting very rationally. They are acting in response to what the majority of their shareholders want.
Stocklin points out a major conflict of interest about shareholders these days, which is that 3/4 of all publicly traded stocks are not held by the people who paid for them, but by fund managers such as BlackRock, Vanguard, and others.
And they are pushing very hard to have corporate America align with what are called the ESG goals, environmental, social, and governance.
Those goals include climate issues, racial topics, and more. And even though such investments often don't bring returns, Stocklin says the fund managers don't suffer the losses, but the people do.
Ultimately, the shareholders, pensioners, retirees, savers, we all take a hit. But the asset managers who are going to earn fees regardless whether the price goes up or down, they're the ones who are actually controlling the share votes. They're the ones who actually get to control the CEOs and the corporate executives.
However, BlackRock denies allegations of following ESG goals. A company representative testified before the Texas state court in December.
You're saying that you have absolutely no bias and you don't have any tilting towards an ESG score whatsoever.
Senator, we have one bias, and that's to get the best risk-adjusted returns for our clients. That is our bias.
Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.